We're going to talk about today reservoirs. We had talked previously about our normal microbiome and our relationship, our symbiotic relationship with our normal microbiome. And we said that we have a lot of organisms that are resident microbiota, which are hanging out with us, but that pathogens have a parasitic relationship, and so they're typically not with us. So where are these pathogens hanging out when they're not with us? So that's what we're going to talk about now. So reservoirs of infectious diseases of humans. Where are these pathogenic microorganisms when they are not with us? All right, so the first one we're going to cover is animal reservoirs. And in the times that we are in right now, this is a big deal because this coronavirus that is spreading across the planet currently right now had an animal reservoir. It is a virus that was infecting bats, and bats were a naturally occurring host for this virus, and it was being spread around and affected the bats. Not fatally, the bats recovered, but it was a virus that infected bats. Since that, it probably moved into another animal. They're not sure what that animal was. And then contact between humans and that intermediate animal is what spread that from their typical animal reservoir into humans. Okay, so a disease that spread naturally from an animal host, which is where they're usually occurring, into humans is defined as a zoonosis or a zoonotic disease. So this Sars virus originally was a zoonotic disease, and it can spread from their animal host to humans. Now, since it spread into humans, it has mutated and has changed, and now it's being spread from human to human. So this new disease, they originally called it a novel coronavirus. Now they call it SARS-CoV-2 because it's a coronavirus that is very similar to a previous coronavirus that we saw that caused the disease SARS. So this virus SARS-CoV-2 is now being spread from humans to humans. So it is now a human disease, this particular one. Originally, it was a zoonotic disease, and it could be occasionally spread into humans. But now, because it is better at infecting humans, we are now spreading it from person to person. All right, so how do we get in contact with these zoonotic diseases? Sometimes it's eating the animals. They think that coming in contact and eating the animals can do it. We can have direct contact with the animals, an animal bite, or even touching the animal or their waste products. And then we can also have zoonotic diseases that are spread from animal to human by a intermediary, a blood-sucking arthropod. So these are mosquito viruses, malaria. A mosquito will bite an animal that has malaria and then bite a human and then can spread it to humans by that method. Fleas, same type of thing, biting insects from that. Okay, so this is a zoonotic disease. These are very difficult to control, and this is the category of diseases that they're very concerned about because we can't control the population of animals. If this is a disease that's present in the wild, it's very difficult to get rid of it. And now in our society, we can see how humans are coming into animal habitats more and more, and there's increased contact between animal and humans. There's increased contact between our domestic animals and our wild animals, our sylvatic animals. And you can see this cute picture of the dog and the raccoon from that. So these are the diseases that causes the most problem nowadays. This is how the COVID-19 disease that came from this SARS virus happened, the SARS-CoV-2 virus. This is how SARS came about. This is how MERS, we're hearing a lot about those in the news. This is also how Zika came about. It was an animal virus, and then was the mosquito vector would bite that. West Nile viruses, some of the viruses, Ebola. These are all zoonotic diseases, and these are the ones that we are currently having the most difficulty with and watching for this. This is a cool TED Talk that talks about this, and I'm actually going to post this separately, and I do want you to watch this. I actually show this in my face-to-face class, so I think it's very important, and it really explains the process of how these animal viruses, these zoonotic diseases, are coming into contacts more and more often with humans. So we'll look at that. All right, and I hope that helps you a little bit with SARS. Yeah. Okay, so next things. Oh, before we do that, some common zoonoses. I think I've already mentioned a lot of these. I mentioned malaria. I've mentioned, well, rabies is one. Lyme disease. Lyme disease, we get bit by a tick, and then we have, and then we get Lyme disease from that. Tapeworms. All of these are typically animal diseases, and then they can be transmitted into humans from that. Okay, so where else? Zoonotic diseases, animal reservoirs. That's one place pathogens can be hanging out. Another place that pathogens can hang out before causing a disease is actually in some humans. Some humans can carry the disease or have the pathogen with them internally, externally, and not show any signs or symptoms of the disease. This is also what we're seeing with this COVID-19 disease. You may not come down with signs or symptoms, or your symptoms may be so mild that you don't even know that you have this disease. But yet at the same time, the virus is still with you and you can still spread it around. We refer to this as a human carrier, and a chronic carrier is somebody who is carrying the pathogen without showing signs and symptoms, but yet can still infect others. There was a famous, the originator kind of thing of this human carrier. There was a person named Typhoid Mary. And I don't know if you've heard this story of Typhoid Mary, but she's a real person. She was living in around 1900 in New York City. She was an Irish immigrant, and like many immigrants at the time and any other time period, she had a low-paying job. She had actually worked herself up to becoming a cook. She started out as a servant, housekeeper, maid, and then had worked her way up to a cook. And actually, cooks got paid more than the maid, so she was continuing on. So she was working as a cook. Now, a big disease going on in that time period was called typhoid fever. Bad disease, high mortality rate, easily spread, just like the coronavirus. It can be easily spread from person to person. And so they didn't have any, it was a bacterial disease, but they didn't have any antibiotics back then. And so the disease had to work its way through, and hopefully patients recovered, and many times patients did not recover. They knew how to prevent it. They knew that you could isolate, self-isolate, just like we're doing. So when people came down with typhoid fever, the house would be quarantined. Nobody would come in and out. And they were very concerned about that. Okay, so Typhoid Mary was working. She got a job with a wealthy family who was going to the lake or to the seashore for the summer. They had actually rented a house, and they brought some of their servants with them, including the cook, Mary Mallon. And she came. And when they got to the seashore, they had hired Mary, and she started cooking for them. And while they were there, I think 9 members of the household came down with typhoid fever. And so they put the house on quarantine and trying to figure out what was going on. Trying to trace it back. How could they get it? So the owners of the house were very concerned because it was a rental house and they didn't want their house to be labeled a typhoid house. It would affect people wanting to rent there. And we can totally understand that because we're all in quarantine now and we're scared to go into a place where there is this disease. So he had hired some public health investigators to come, and they interviewed staff and took water samples, and we're trying to find where this typhoid came from. Well, typhoid, one of the symptoms is diarrhea. You get diarrhea with the disease, and it's spread we know now in a fecal to oral fashion. So diarrhea, the disease bacteria comes out in the feces, and then you come in contact with the feces, and you can spread it through food or water or touching, going back and touching your face and consuming it, food products and consuming it. So they had looked at Mary, and she actually looked at her previous employment, and she actually, at several places that she worked prior to this, there was also an outbreak of typhoid fever. And so they kind of narrowed it down to her, and they were thinking that she was carrying it even though she wasn't sick. So public health officials went to her house and they asked her to take a test. And she refused because, again, she was an immigrant. She kind of had a distrust of the medical community, and she wasn't sick. She's like, I'm not spreading typhoid fever. This is a horrible disease. Everybody knows it, but I'm not sick. I cannot be spreading this. And she refused to be tested. So the public health official left, came back with the police, and they forced her to take a test. And sure enough, the test came up positive, and they said, even though you're not sick, you're spreading it, and you can't work as a cook. And again, hygiene practices, you can see that they weren't as good at washing hands back then, and she could easily go to the bathroom, not completely wash her hands, and then contaminate food products. So they told her that she was spreading it. She did not believe them. Again, she insisted she wasn't sick. There was no way that she could be spreading this disease because she didn't have it. And so she couldn't work as a cook. They told her that she could not work as a cook because she was spreading it, and let her go. So she went on, and then she got a job as a cook again. And sure enough, that house came down with typhoid. So they arrested her and actually put her in jail and told her that she was spreading typhoid and she couldn't do this. So she served a sentence. She got released. She changed her name and went on and got another job as a cook. Again, she did not feel like she was spreading it because she was never sick. Being a cook gets more money than being a servant, and she felt like they were denying her the right to, to make a living for her family. So she changed her name, got a job, and sure enough, that family got typhoid fever. So this time they arrested her. They sent her to an insane asylum. She lived the rest of her days on an island prison, insane asylum off New York Harbor, and actually did a lot of good work there, helping care for other people that were currently there. But she became known as Typhoid Mary. It was a big deal in the news, and the fact that she changed her name and then deliberately got the job she was not supposed to have, and was spreading typhoid, that really set poorly with the public, and she kind of became a pariah. And Typhoid Mary became a slang for a long time. And if you were spreading things that were bad, even if it was just spreading gossip or spreading rumors or something, they would call you a Typhoid Mary, So that is the story of a chronic carrier. And in our current case right now, that's what they're so concerned about. People who have no signs or symptoms, or very mild signs and symptoms, and they don't believe that they're sick with this disease, but yet at the same time can be spreading it to others. So that's why there's such a push for everybody to stay home, even when you don't feel sick, even when you don't know it. Some people are asymptomatic or have only mild symptoms. Plus, you can be infectious for a few days prior and a few days after. This is a new disease, so we're still coming up with the data. We don't know exactly how long you're infectious before. We're not sure exactly how long you're infectious after. So we're trying to be as cautious as possible with that. Okay, this is a human carrier, not a reservoir. We refer to this as a human carrier. And there's another clinical case study that's in your book that's kind of interesting. And that's what this picture is from. And it involves same disease, typhoid fever, and it involves a worker that was urinating on a job site when they were laying pipes and water pipes and how that worked. So I'll let you guys read that on your own. Okay, so where are these pathogens hanging out? Reservoirs. We have an animal reservoir. We have a human carrier. The last place is a non-living reservoir. This is where soil or water or food is the contamination source. This is when we have those shutdowns and E. coli is found in lettuce, and there's a recall and there's no lettuce available. This is when we have listeria contaminating our Bluebell ice cream, and they have a shutdown. Typically, these are diseases that are spread by fecal contamination, and then they get into the food or the water source, and that's what's going on. So this SARS-CoV-2, they do not believe that a non-living reservoir is a big source of contamination for this, which is why they're telling you to go out and you can eat at restaurants, take out, pick up, that even if a person is preparing the food, as long as they're taking some proper typical precautions on that, it's unlikely that the virus will stay long on the food, especially heated foods and that kind of thing. So is it possible that you can get the virus if the person preparing it leaves some respiratory droplets? That's where they think the biggest transmission is. It's possible. They're still looking at that. I'm not saying it can't happen, but it's not the typical source of contamination. So that's what's going on from there. All right, so water, food, non-living reservoirs, that's what's going on.